Today, Nikon ZFC. What I love about it, what I wish were different, we'll compare it to my Z50, and I'll talk about what I absolutely love about the new 28 2.8 Z lens and the 50 to 250 DX. Well, hey everybody, Hudson here. Welcome to this week's Approaching the Scene. I've been looking forward to doing this review for a while. I've been knocking around with this little ZFC camera and some fun glass, playing with it. And there's some things I just love about it, and I'm excited to share with you, as well as some things that make me think, for another group of people, the Z50 is still probably the better choice of the two APS-C mirrorless cameras. And we'll look at some images. I'll talk about the differences between these two cameras, what I really like about the lenses, the lightweight, cool lenses I've been using with them. And you know, just pros and cons of both cameras. These cameras are going to be in my links that are in this video's full description. You click on the title or show more. There's also a chaptered out table of contents where you can click the time code to watch or rewatch the part of this video that you're most interested in. And links to all the gear that I use, I keep updated at hudsonhenry.com/ATS-links. Those links help me out, so thanks so much everyone for using them. Also, on the website, we're going to be launching the latter half of 2022's workshops. So workshops in Yellowstone, the Tetons, the Owens Valley, that's an exciting one, Portland and its surrounding region, waterfalls, mountains, gorges. So look out for those. Sign up for early advance notice if you're interested over at hudsonhenry.com/workshops. We've sold out of all the early workshops for 2022, the Costa Rica, Death Valley, Joshua Tree, Palouse, but there's waiting lists for those if you want to get on them there too. So sign up for all that stuff. All right, ZFC. I was excited when this camera was launched. I have my Z50. And you know, I asked B&H if they'd loan me a ZFC to have a look at with that 28mm 2.8 special edition lens that they launched with it, which is actually a full frame lens. It's not an APS-C lens. And I love this lens. Within just a couple days shooting with it, I ordered one for myself. And I also asked for the 50 to 250 DX lens that they've got, that they launched alongside the Z50 a while ago, but I never got because I've got the longer FX lenses. I kept hearing people rave about it, and then I've tested some of Nikon's standard Z-mount lenses I wouldn't expect to be great for the full frame system, and they're amazing. So I thought, well, I'll test all this APS-C stuff out. And it's been fun. So thanks to B&H for loaning me this stuff. I'm putting links to B&H to buy it all in this video's description, and those guys are great to work with. I know some of this is back order, but they're really good at getting stock. So this camera reminds me of my film cameras of old. You know, the last one that I got rid of was my FM3A. I held on to that the longest, and this camera really feels like that. I sort of shed a tear when I put that camera in the box to get rid of it. It's just a really bespoke, beautiful, harkening back to the days of old when you had dials and you had numbers printed on the top of your camera. Now that said, it's a little more awkward to use for those of us that have really gotten used to the ergonomics and control systems of modern DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. So there's pluses and minuses. You know, I'm going to go through the things that I love about this. We'll go through some images, both from the Z50 and from this. We're going to compare the Z50 to this. We're going to compare high ISO performance with this, the Z50, the D500. Those are all almost the same. And then the Z6 II, we'll look at some images and we'll talk about images a bit. But first I'm just going to go through a group of things that I like and a group of things that I'm not such a huge fan about with the ZFC itself. And we'll talk about who they're both for when we wrap up. All right, so the Z50 versus the ZFC, and whether it's worth buying into Nikon's APS-C system. I've been a big fan of the APS-C Nikon system for years. I've had an APS-C camera alongside my full frame camera just because they give you additional reach with the same lenses. They crop in on the projection of those full frame lenses and get you, more frame filling ability in certain situations. They're light, they're easy to work with. I think it's wonderful that you can share lenses on the same mount. So the big thing I already talked about, it's the nostalgia. They really got it right with making this camera look and feel like the days of old. And there's young people who are gonna love how bespoke this is. And there's those of us who shot in the days of film where it just reminds us of cameras that we loved and adored. The size is really nice, but it's actually a little bit wider a camera than the Z50, although the Z50 has a nice grip that sticks out, which I actually kind of like, where the battery goes, that makes it a little bit, they're probably on par weight-wise. This fits in a pocket a little bit better for me than in, say, a winter coat pocket, my Z50. This one's just a little long for that sticking into a coat pocket. The quality of the camera is great. I haven't tested it in really rough conditions. I know it's not as weather sealed as these bomb-proof Z6 and Z7 and Z6 II and Z7 II that I've been shooting with, and the new Z9 is supposed to be even more. But they are splash resistant and weather sealed. Nikon's really good about that stuff. So, I wouldn't hesitate to shoot out in the rain with it. I haven't done that, but I wouldn't hesitate to. I like the fact that when I'm out in a group of people shooting, this camera feels under the radar. It doesn't put people off. People stay at ease when you pull a camera that looks like this out. It looks like something that their grandfather photographed them with ages ago. I've got a kindergartner, my boy Pike, and my little girl Pepper's a preschooler. So I shot a lot with this camera around Halloween while we were having parties. And in a lot of cases, I'm meeting the parents and kids for the first time. And toting this camera around was more of a conversation starter. It didn't put people off. Nobody felt like, why has that guy got a big camera in my face? It was just nice. And I think that those people in my audience that really love street shooting and want a kind of incognito camera to take street shooting, this camera's awesome. And this lens with this camera, this little 28 2.8, it's fast, it's sharp, wide open. It's good in low light, and it's unobtrusive. I mean, it's a great little lens. On this smaller sensor, on the APS-C sensor, it works out to be like a, 38 millimeter, something like that. It's a really nice length for street shooting. This, plus maybe the 51.8, that's so just amazing for the full frame. I love that lens. Maybe an 85 would just be awesome for those of you that are street shooters. I also think that the 16 to 50 that I've been using a lot with my Z50 this last couple of years complements the camera really, really well. They're making it in silver to go with this too. And the kit, if you buy this camera with the kit with the 16 to 50, you get a little bit better deal. I'm gonna link the kits. I think that's the best deal out there if you're buying the ZFC, because you'll get this lens for about half price. They're both the same price. They're both like $300 lenses, the 28 2.8 as well as the 16 to 50, but you get like $50 more off if you buy this lens as part of the package, the 16 to 50. So if you want both, I'd buy the camera with the 16 to 50, and it's a really versatile setup. That gives you the equivalent of about 24 to 75, which is a great knock around, travel, shoot the kids, events, whatever lens. So, the full articulating LCD, that's something the Z50 doesn't have. This LCD can hide itself and protect itself. You flip it out, you spin it around. If you're the person who wants to take selfies, you can see yourself. That's not the reason I love the full articulating screen. I just think it's really easy. Whether you're down low, whether you're up high, it's very easy to put it right where you want it. And then in rough conditions, when you're carrying the camera, you can flip it around and close it where it's not exposed. It's protected up against the back of the camera with a hard shell behind it. I love that. I actually broke the LCD on my Z7 II, had to send it in, spend a bunch of money, and be without it for a fair bit of time last year. And I don't think it would have happened if I'd been able to flip it around. I was carrying it. It wasn't a moment while I was photographing. And every time I'm using the ZFC, I keep that flipped around unless I'm using it. The viewfinder, it's got a great viewfinder just like the Z50. The mirrorless viewfinders that Nikon has put in the Z cameras, there's not a one that just isn't wonderful in my opinion. The color's great, the refresh rate's great, it looks real and live, and in low light it stays bright. I think that's the big difference for those who come from an optical viewfinder. One thing they did that they didn't do in the Z50, let's face it, the ZFC is a lot like the Z52. You got the Z6 II, the Z7 II. This is a lot like the Z52. It's just that they styled it retro. They didn't make a Z52. It has exactly the same sensor, image quality, processing engine, frame rate, ISO, you name it. It's all the same. It just has a few enhancements and then the retro styling. And one of those enhancements is the extended shutter speed, which I love in the Z6 II and Z7 II, and it carries on to the ZFC where you get to program in up to 900 seconds, 15 minutes for shutter speed. For doing long exposure work, it's just wonderful. That's a really, really great feature. It gets the same autofocus enhancements that the Z6 II and Z7 II got as well. It's got a little bit faster processing, so it's able to do tracking just a little bit better, whether it's eye detect or whether it's object detection or subject tracking when you override and use subject tracking. You know, and contrary to a lot of people out there, I have no problem. You'll look through the images, I'll show you some stuff I've shot with the Z50, which doesn't even have quite as good of autofocus tracking as the ZFC. I have no problem shooting, you know, most birds in flight, even some fast-moving little birds in flight, people surfing, kids running and playing in manic situations. I get great razor-sharp images with these cameras. You just have to play with the system a little bit and learn how the auto area autofocus is designed to work and when to override it and how to do that. Also, it gets eye detect in video, which is a nice thing, and it gets eye detect in wide area autofocus, which the Z50 doesn't have, just like the Z6 and Z7. And it's a little easier to navigate which area mode you're in from the eye menu. You hit the eye menu, you can choose. You want auto area or you want auto area with eye detect, animal or person. In the Z50, you got to jump into the custom settings menu and turn eye detect on or off for people or animals, and then you just go auto area with the eye menu. So it's one more step with the 50. That's a nice thing with this. Although you can't program a button to do it externally, or if you do, you burn the only custom setting button. We'll get to the cons. USB-C power through. So what that means is I can take one of the power delivery battery banks that I recommend in my ATS Lynx gear. You know, I like an Anchor power delivery capable 10,000 milliamp battery bank for this. And you just plug it in, and let's say you're doing long exposures or time lapse or something like that. It'll keep the camera powered up while you're working. That's awesome. It'll also charge it while it's in your bag. That the Z50 can do. But this camera, you can actually pass power right through while you're plugged in through a power delivery capable charger. Image quality is wonderful. You know, I think the image quality with the Z50 and the ZFC are on par with the D500. They're sort of the top of the line of what Nikon's done with APS-C. When you look at the noise patterns at higher ISO, the D500 has a little less color noise, a little finer grained noise, but it's a similar level of noise. I think it's more processing than anything else. They all perform really, really well. And the image quality is wonderful. You know, I find the metering is great. The color science in the images straight out of the camera are lovely. Don't require a whole lot of tweaking in my post-processing. And then, you know, the highlights and shadows, it's got that dynamic range that I just love in Nikon's cameras ever since the D800 came out. They nail that dynamic range. So if you've got something that looks a little overexposed and you pull the highlights back, it's amazing how you can recover highlight detail and shadow detail. Again, we'll look through some images. I love this 28 millimeter 2.8 lens that they announced with it. Now, you can buy it as part of the package. Again, I think you get a better deal if you get the 16 to 50, if you're gonna have that lens, which I think you should with these APS-C cameras. It's just made to go together. But this lens is absolutely fabulous. As I said, the first thing I did after shooting with it a little bit was order one for myself. And you know, I like the styling of the special edition one. It just feels retro and old school to me. And it reminds me of my old 28-2.8, which was one of my original Nikon lenses, the manual focus. This thing's a fast autofocusing lens though. And it works great on the Z6 II and the Z7 II as well, and it will work on the Z9, it's nice. All right, 11 frames per second. I get with a fast SD card about 85 images before I hit the end of the buffer. That's pretty amazing, raw files. It's about the same as the Z50. You know, great speed in buffer. And you know, you combine that with eye detect autofocus, it's pretty amazing what you can accomplish. One thing they added to this, along with the enhanced autofocus system, is automated focus stacking capture. So that's got the focus shift shooting where you can set, this is the closest image I want it to move in a certain step width out and focus all the way to infinity or stop after so many images. That's available on the Z6, Z7, Z62, Z7 II. Wasn't available on the Z50. It's nice they added that to this. I don't know that its desired or its main target audience is going to use that much, but it's a nice feature. I think it's nice that it's in there. Things that I don't like about the camera. Well, it's funny because one of the things that I don't love about the camera is actually in a kind of a schizophrenic way, the same thing that I do like about it, the look and nostalgia, these dials and numbers. It's awkward moving back and forth between the cameras I've been using so much over the last years with everything controlled via wheels and what mode you're in. That's very simple to me and it's dialed into my brain, to having to go back to, oh, I'm in aperture priority mode now, so I need to go in and change, I'm in shutter priority, I have to hit this top button and turn this little wheel and either look at the screen or get my reading glasses on and look at the tiny numbers on the top as I switch it. And ISO, the same thing. It's, the wheels and numbers, they're beautiful, but it's a little awkward to use, especially if you haven't been using one of these cameras in a really long time. I think my biggest complaint that this lost from the Z50 is not having user programmable settings in the modes. So this has, program, shutter priority, aperture priority, manual mode, and then user 1 and user 2. The Z6 II and the Z7 II have user 1, user 2, user 3, and you can program all kinds of things into that. What mode you're in, what focus settings that you have, what focus mode that you have, what ISO, whether it's auto ISO or not, all these kinds of settings that you want for, say, shooting sports and action. You can just lock it into U3 or U2 or U1 on the Z50. There is no U2 or U1 on this camera. There's a little switch on the side here from manual, aperture, shutter priority, or program mode, or automatic. And so no dice on that, which leads me into one of my second complaints, which it only has one custom setting, one custom function button right here in the front under the lens on the right side. So you really need to be careful about what you program into that, especially since there's no user modes to change what's programmed into that without delving into the menu and the controls menu and choosing to change that to a setting from a long list of settings. It's awkward. I'm doing a complete setup video for this camera separately on YouTube. So look into that and I'll show you what I chose to put there for my particular use case. But you really have to think about what you want to put on that one button, particularly since you don't have user modes. I like the fact that the Z50 has a user 1 and a user 2 button, or it has a function 1 and a function 2 button up front, as well as a programmable video record button, as well as user 1 and user 2 menu up top, modes up top. Just makes it really versatile. All right, so the ISO is only on the dial here. So to turn auto ISO on and off, you have to go into the menu and change it. Now that's not dissimilar to the Z50, except that on the Z50, you do have an ISO button and you can change it with wheels. So it's actually quite a bit different. You can hit this ISO button and change your ISO with the back wheel, and then the front wheel, just toggling it once, turns auto ISO on, twice turns it off. And you can program in what your maximum ISO you're willing for it to go up to is inside in the menu. You can set a threshold. But being able to just hit that button and click, I'm in auto ISO, click, I'm out of auto ISO, that's really, really nice instead of having to delve into menus like you do here. The lack of a grip, it's great, retro, beautifully styled, but you got to kind of hold on to this thing. It's not like the 50 where I can carry it by 2 fingers in the grip. I can feel it's just rock solid in my hand, squeezed in there, pistol grip style. The grips that we're used to on the modern camera are great. It makes it easy to hold on. Playback button. One thing that they really got right on the Z50 was putting the playback button down here on the bottom right. They didn't have any space to the left side of the viewfinder, so they put some of the controls right on the screen as touchscreen buttons, and they put the playback button down here on the bottom right. Well, you see, I can move my thumb from the autofocus button or from the autofocus point selector right down here and hit play while I'm looking through the viewfinder. Let's say I'm using a long lens. I don't have to move my hands. I just move my thumb. With this camera and with the Z6, Z7, Z62, Z7 II, they put it on the top left, and that's awkward because if you're shooting with a long lens, you have to actually reach back and hit it. And the thing today is, it made sense in the day of the DSLR because you're shooting and then you want to look at it, you drop your camera down and hit play. But nowadays, you can review your images right in the viewfinder better than you can review them on the back LCD if you're in bright conditions or if you wear reading glasses and you've got the diopter adjusted for your eyesight. You just hit play, boom. But you have to reach back to do that instead of just moving your thumb. And they changed that on the Z9. They listened to people like me that were screaming about it. So that's a nice thing. All right, let's jump in, let's look at image quality, and then we'll kind of wrap up. All right, so let's run through and look at image quality with an eye towards autofocus accuracy, ability to capture high contrast and recover highlights, as well as just the quality of the lenses, that 50 to 250, the 16 to 50, as well as that full frame 28 2.8 that I was testing on the Z50. So these are all raw files straight out of the Z50. I've got some to look at from the Z50 too. We can compare afterward. And these were all captured with that 28 2.8 prime, as well as the 50 to 250 at a couple of different Halloween parties this year that my kids were at. And let's take a look at the 28 2.8. That lens just really blows my mind. Let's jump in, have a look at these bigger. This is our little front axle. Look at the sharpness at wide open, 2.8 out of this lens. Just color rendition, sharpness, amazing. Here's another fun shot of Sybil. This is one of my boy's best friend's little sister. And this shot's a really high contrast scene. Let's jump in and see whether we can recover the highlights from a scene like this. The camera was making all the decisions here, chose to kind of expose for the shadows, but did it make a good choice? Did it protect enough of the highlights? I tend to like to pull the whites back a little bit before I do something dramatic like this, not all the way, but back a little bit, and then pull my highlights back until I recover lost highlight detail. And there you see, both the blue in the sky came back, Sybil's little facial details are coming back. It's still a high contrast scene, but there's a lot you can do to balance this scene out, and we haven't lost any detail in there. Jumping back into the library mode, I'm hitting E to go back to grid view. So we can see all of our data here. Here is Otto, one of Pike's best friends. He's actually coming over after school to hang out today. Look at the eye detect autofocus. These kids are running around. He's bashing people with balloons, the Knights of the Round Table, and I'm just using auto area autofocus with eye detect for all of these images, and it's nailing it each and every time. It even knew that, the pizza bite is such a foreground element. I'm moving the camera a bit with it. It picked that up instead of Pike's eyes and nailed it. I love the Halloween spider motif. Here's Pepper. As a unicorn, of course. Evan, another one of Pike's best friends. My wife, Stacy, even though her eyes are shaded by all this intricate Day of the Dead get up, the eye detect autofocus still nailing it. And I just love that depth of field from the 2.8. That 28 2.8 renders autofocus details in a really beautiful way. It has a classic lens feel to it where the part of the image that's sharp is so sharp, and what's out of focus falls in such a nice, beautiful way. Here's another good example of that. And I'm running around with a prime lens right up at people, but this camera is so small and so retro looking, it really doesn't faze people. Just a fun camera and lens combo to be running around a scene like this. Let's take a look at some of the 50 to 250 images. Here is Jack, my friend Chelsea's new little boy, and really nice sharp image all the way out at 250 as long as this little kit lens goes. It's got vibration reduction built in. It's not the world's most amazing bokeh, but with that long a focal length, it's doing a nice job separating the subject from the background. Rack back a little bit, get a little more detail, a little more in the depth of field, still a nice sharp frame where the camera's doing a nice job recognizing the eyes, moving around in action, has no problem with that longer lens, picking up those little moments, slices of life. I'm shooting from a long distance as the kids are running down, coming out of sleds. There's Divine coming out of the sled, Pike and Pepper jockeying with each other, Pike and Divine getting a hug. It's just nailing the eyes, even with the smeared camera and dirt all over the face. Pepper, my good buddy Trevor, Jack with his dad, Kevin. And you take a look here, one more example here of the camera just making a fantastic decision about exposure in a complicated backlit situation. And if I pull the highlight slider, all that detail in Jack's hair is recoverable. Obviously, it's all right there. So cool stuff. Now, not to dismiss the Z50, I want to show you some frames from this camera shot with a number of different lenses. With my 500 millimeter, full frame PF lens, 70 to 200, couple different 70 to 200s, the old full frame, the old F mount, as well as the new Z mount, and the 16 to 50. Let's look at that 16 to 50 first. These are shot, I was at Joshua Tree right when I first got the Z50, and it started to blow me away. This is a sunset shot where I was like, wow, the dynamic range out of this little camera is wonderful. I tested how it handles backlight out on the Manhattan Beach Pier on our way back from Joshua Tree. Incredible, stellar out of such a small little kit lens. This is that 16 to 50, which I would really recommend you consider getting. Whichever one of these cameras, it's a deal buying it included in the kit. Here it is, stopping down a bit and doing a Sunstar at dawn as we're backcountry skiing up Mount St. Helens. You can see there's a little ghosting. That's a pretty nice sun flare from such a cheap, light, affordable kit lens. Here again, my kiddos in Baja. I'm going to be back here at Christmas time with the family and kiteboarding and hanging out. But then again, you slap that 70 to 200 millimeter lens on the camera. This is with my old FLED. Birds flying by, you get the equivalent of 300 millimeters there, flying by level to our clifftop house in Baja. Here's a frigate bird shot with the Z50, auto area, autofocus. I'm filling the frame with the bird, and boom, it just locks as long as I'm tracking along with that bird. And people say you can't photograph birds in flight with the first generation Z cameras. I'm saying you can do it with the 50. My friend John Wilbur, not selecting an autofocus point for any of these, not overriding with subject tracking. It looks at that scene and knows that that kite surfer out there is what's important to me. Locked him in. Once again, this is with the 70 to 200 2.8. In Florida, visiting the kids' grandparents, here we are, I'm tracking these pelicans, even as they come by surfers closer in the scene. My 500 PF with the Z50 hanging off the back of it stays locked. Auto area, autofocus. Because the bird's large in the frame and I'm tracking with it, moving alongside it, the camera locks it and keeps it locked. I was even able to pick up this little diving bird. This is with the 500, once again, on the Z50. I was able to pick up this little diving bird because I was tracking it from up high, following it with the camera. Camera picked it up and nailed it as it went diving in. Pelicans in flight. This is all Z50, 500 PF. Here are my kiddos with the 70 to 250, the 70 to 200 new S lens, which I just love. That lens is so wickedly razor sharp, and if you've got eyes in the scene, it picks them up. Here I'm teaching Pike and Pepper to ride on a surfboard in small waves, and I just told Stacy, here's the autofocus button, hit it, and you'll see it lock on eyes, hold it down, fire, and she was nailing shots in nice sharp focus. So again, this camera has great image quality from a tonal range perspective, dynamic range perspective, sharpness perspective with regard to its autofocus. It handles these lenses great. And I think that both the 16 to 50 and 50 to 250 lenses are wonderful on both of these cameras. And even the full frame lenses work great on them. Don't hesitate to be using them with them. And I love that 28 2.8. This camera and the Z50, I think, are amazing little tools. I think the person who the ZFC is more for is that person, maybe the street shooter who wants to be really incognito, maybe that first-time photographer, your grandchild who's in art school and is just going to love the retro styling and feel of this camera. You know that they're going to embrace it more than they would something that looks more modern and is covered in buttons. I think this camera, again, great street shooting weapon. It has some enhancements, yes, those extended shutter speeds, yes, the focusing is a little bit, just a tiny bit more advanced, and it has, the focus shift shooting so you can do automated focus stacking. I think those tend to be features that you're more likely to be looking to the Z6 or the Z7 II. if you're a person that's really into using your camera to that kind of level. I don't think it's absolutely required in a backup camera. I don't think it's absolutely required in an action camera. I mean, maybe a little bit of the autofocus differences, but they're not extreme. I do great work with my Z50, and I have no problem, as you saw, looking through images, capturing action with it. The Z50 feels better in my hand. The Z50 is more programmable. I love the custom user settings. I love the function buttons. I like the form factor of it. And I think it's just a stellar deal right now. The fact that you can get this camera with this compact little 16 to 50 and this 50 to 250, which takes you from the equivalent of 24 to 375 millimeters of full frame focal length, all for 1,100 bucks, makes it one of the sweetest deals in town. So I think that if you're a person just wanting to get into photography and not wanting to spend a ton of money, this system's amazing. It's an amazing steal right now. If you want a camera that reminds you of the old days and it just makes you smile every time you pull it out, and you want to set it on your desk and look at it, and you want to go out and do street shooting and be incognito or be in party situations and keep people at ease, the ZFC is a great choice, and it's slightly more advanced in certain ways. I think it's a little bit hamstrung by a lack of custom control settings and just a little bit more awkward to use, particularly if you're bouncing from your Z7 or Z6 back and forth because the controls are just so different. So I'm still going to kind of keep my major recommendation being for the Z50 with that kit, that's 16 to 50 and the 50 to 250. These lenses shock with how good they are for APS-C variable aperture lenses. It's just surprising. And I gotta say, you know, if you start shooting with this little 28-2.8 special edition or the regular edition that looks a little more modern if you're throwing it on your other cameras, it's gonna surprise you just how darn good a lens this thing is. It's sharp and fun to shoot with.